Okay, so the word for the day is Brexit. And yes, this is the same shirt I was wearing before, and no, that was not planned. The reason I am doing this today is because someone just shoved that in my face. A march on London for Brexit because the politicians have made a mess of it. Can't deny that. And it's going to be on the 20th of October. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people turning up for it because, as the flyer says, Brexit will trash our vital public services, too late, and wreck the life chances of the young. My goodness, what a terrible thing it must be. Now, I want to talk about Brexit a little bit because ever since the referendum, I've heard people talk about how it's motivated by racism and xenophobia and anti-immigrant sentiment, and I've just sat back and said, la 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 la, because I don't want to get into it. But that's horse pucky. So let me just touch on a few things to sort of explain what I mean. If you're not that familiar with what the EU is, it was founded in 1993. It's comprised of 28 different countries, population of about 500 million. Now, the decision whether to come out of Europe or not is one that has been going on for a long time. It was founded in 93. I moved to Britain. Well, I first came to Britain in 95, and then I moved here permanently in 96. So I've been here for pretty much the duration of that time. And it's always been a major issue. The Conservative Party in particular has had a faction that has been banging the drum for withdrawal from the EU for decades now. So this is not a new issue. This has been going on for a long time. And in fact, this is one of those rare issues where you've got kind of agreement between the right and left. You've got Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, who also for decades has been wanting the UK to come out of the EU for a different set of reasons than that the right wing has been wanting us to come out of the EU. But it is one of those weird issues where you've got some bipartisan agreement on it. But ever since the referendum came up, the whole thing has been framed in themes of racism and anti-immigrant sentiment. And it's also associated with these rather unsavory characters who were campaigning for Brexit, your Nigel Farages and your Boris Johnsons. For me, the referendum was something really weird and new. I'd never been presented with a vote to choose what system of government I wanted to live under. Not which political party, but which system of government. So I took that seriously, and I read about it, and I learned about it. And the more I learned about the EU, the more I realized that it is not a democracy. It is dressed up like a democracy, but it just isn't. What do I mean by that? Well, as you, I'm sure, understand, in order for democracy to work, people need to be aware of it. They need to be engaged with it. You need to have people voting. And what we see with the EU in Britain, the UK, is that there is very little engagement in Britain. People don't pay attention to it. It gets relatively very little coverage in the media, what goes on in the EU. And more importantly, or just as importantly, nobody understands how it works. And I'm generalizing now, but consider this. The EU is made up of a European Parliament, a European Commission, I'm going to look at a list now, a European Council of Ministers. And if you want to know who the president is, well, that depends, because the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the European Council all have somebody called president, and they're three different people. Now, you've also got the Council of Europe versus the Council of the European Union. Don't get them confused because they are different. What's the difference? I don't know. I'd be surprised if you could find anyone who did. This is a giant bureaucracy that was set up originally to help facilitate international trade, but which quickly became apparent that it had aspirations to become a federal government of its own, so that it would become a federal Europe, one nation of Europe, with individual member states, which was not what the UK signed up for in the first place. And it's not something, let me be clear, it's not something that I'm opposed to in principle, but the system that they've set up there is a nightmare. It's a total nightmare. It's not transparent. It's not accountable. People don't understand how it works, and they're not eager to explain it, frankly. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. When the recession hit around 2008, some European countries were hit harder than others. We had particularly difficult situations in Greece and Italy. I believe unemployment got up to 40% in Greece. I mean, it was really, really bad, and it's still very bad there. Their economy went bankrupt and had to be bailed out, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And so the European Union decided, okay, well, we're going to have to sort of clamp down on Greece. We're going to have to micromanage how they're running their national economy. Now, is that something any country signed up for when they joined the EU? I'm not so sure. But in this particular case with Greece, we have an account from the European Economic Affairs Commissioner, someone by the name of Moscovici, who said, and this is talking about how the decisions were taken on what restrictions to place on Greece. This is from within the European Union. He said it's a scandal, deciding in this way the fate of a nation, imposing detailed decisions on their pensions, their labor market, the basic details of life of a country, which were decided in a body, behind closed doors, work prepared by technocrats without the minimum control of a parliament, without the media really knowing what is being said, without stable criteria or even a common guideline. Because those decisions were taken not by the Council of Ministers, not by anything official that you would have ever heard of. Those decisions were all taken by a body with no name in a room that was private and not open to the press. The conversations that they had in that room were not made available to anybody. And they came out with a series of diktats to Greece. Greece, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do the other. Or else, basically. Is that how you want a government to work? Do you want a government operating behind closed doors that you have no idea who's making decisions and no way to address those decisions should you disagree with them? For example, Europe has 73 seats for the UK, the European Parliament. Now, you would imagine that those 73 British MEPs, members of the European Parliament, would go over there and, as a voting bloc, represent the UK's interests, but they don't. The European Parliament is divided up into 8 political groups that are bound by ideology. And the British MEPs are scattered amongst them. So instead of having a British voting bloc or a UK voting bloc in the European Parliament, you don't. You basically don't have that. You have all the UK MEPs scattered to the winds in each of the different political groups. And let's say you want to find out, well, how many British MEPs are in this political group versus that political group? They call them political groups. This is the lack of imagination you get in the EU. They're political groups. Which British MEPs are in this one, which are in that one? Try to find out. I challenge you. I did. I tried to look online. It is really difficult to find information about how things work there. So yeah, we've got 8 political groups, a divided British contingent, but the main reason that a lot of Remainers, people who don't want the UK to leave the EU, give is that they say, well, the economic benefit of staying in the EU is considerable, and they're right, it is. And leaving that will present a lot of challenges and probably quite a bit of pain, at least in the short term, financially. So, in that they are correct. They also believe that it's worth staying in the EU because the EU is relatively progressive socially, maybe even more so than the British government has been historically over the last couple decades. And that is also relatively true. We do get a lot of socially progressive legislation coming out of the EU. However, will that always be the case? Will the EU always be socially progressive? Right now, there's a big upsurge of right-wing extremism in Europe. They're taking control of a lot of local places, and even national elections are showing a real surge in these extremist right-wing ideologies. Are we certain that the EU's politics are always going to be socially progressive? I'm not certain of that. And what if they changed? What would we do about it with our voting bloc, which isn't a voting bloc? You've got a government in which people don't know what they're voting for. They don't know what's happening there. They don't know who's in charge of what. They don't know how it works. They're happy to sit back and enjoy the financial benefits of being part of the EU And they're happy to surrender their democratic voice for a social progressivism that may be momentary. I think that's bonkers. Also, by the by, Europe's heading for some difficulties economically in the not-too-distant future. So if we do make it out in the next year or so or two, we may be thanking our lucky stars that we got out when we did. In any event, what I'm saying is, if you've been told that Brexit is about racism, it's about xenophobia, it's about people hating immigrants, don't believe them. It's not. I'm not saying nobody voted with that in mind, but there are entirely moral and ethical and legitimate reasons for us to say it's a terrible idea for us to be in the EU. And even though there's some short-term pain in store for us, democratically, ethically, morally, ideologically, leaving is the right thing to do. I'm absolutely certain of that. So that's my 2 cents, and I appreciate you listening.